A very warm welcome to all of you. So in this video we'll be discussing your chemical kinetics previous year question which was asked in your IIT Jam chemistry examination in the year 2018. Right? So there were basically three questions from your chemical kinetics and it's a super important topic, right? It's super important chapter, right? So let's begin with the video. So this is the first question which was asked from your chemical kinetics and the question is for the radical chain reaction below, the correct classification for step 2 and step 3 is respectively, right? So these are the three steps given for your any complex reaction, right? And we have to tell step 2 about step 2 and step 3, right? Whether it's chain propagating step, chain terminating step, chain branching or chain initiation, right? So we have to categorize these step 2 and step 3 steps of a complex reaction, right? So before solving the question, let's try and understand what basically are the steps of your complex reaction, right? So there are three steps. Basically, I'm talking in general, right? So there are three steps: chain initiation steps, chain propagating step, and chain terminating step, right? So what is chain initiation steps, right? So what happens when your light or heat falls particularly on your molecule and the molecule dissociates to form the radicals, right? So that type of step is basically known as your chain initiation step, right? In which your radicals are radical initiates, right? The radicals are formed which will basically form your body of your complex reaction, skeleton of your complex reaction, right? So the generation of your free radical step is basically your chain initiation step, right? So next is your chain propagating step, right? Now what happens in your chain propagating step, right? Whenever let me try to understand, let me try to explain this concept with the help of this particular, right, step 2, right? So just look at my cursor. Whenever a free radical, right, reacts with any stable molecule to produce another stable molecule along with the free radical, right? I repeat, whenever a free radical reacts with any stable molecule and produces your another stable molecule along with the free radical, so that type of reaction, right, is known as your chain propagating type of a reaction, right? Chain propagating step. So this is basically a chain propagating step, right? And the third is your chain terminating step. Now what happens in chain terminating step? Whenever two radicals, right, combine, I'm just taking two as a number, I'm assuming, right, it can be any number. So whenever your two radical combine to form a stable compound and no such radical generation takes place, and that step is particularly your termination step. So those type of step is known as your chain terminating steps in your chemical complex reactions, right? So these three are the basically your steps in your complex reactions, right? Now we have to tell about your step 2 and step 3 for this particular question, right? Now as I told you right now that whenever your radical reacts with another stable molecule to produce another stable molecule along with your radical, right? So radical reacts with some molecule and produces another radical. So that type of steps is known as chain propagating steps. So obviously your step 2 would be your chain propagating step, right? So chain propagating step, right? So in option number A is it's chain propagating, in option number C is chain propagating, and option number D it's chain propagating, right? So we have to differentiate between option number A, C and D, right? Now we have to see for step 3 also, right? Now what happens in step 3? A similar kind of a fashion is a similar kind of a trend is taking place in your step 3 also, right? So here a radical is reacting with some stable molecule to produce another stable molecule along with your a free radical, right? So this is also a chain propagating step. So basically step 2 and step 3 both are your chain propagating step. So the option number C is the correct answer, that is your chain propagating and chain propagating. So for this particular question the option number C is your correct answer, right? So this is basically the question which was asked from a chemical kinetics on complex reaction steps, right? So now let's move on to our next question. So this is the next question, right? It was asked in your MSQ section, right? Multiple select question, that is more than one option could be your right answer, right? So let's read out the question. So the question is for the reaction shown is scheme 1. So this is the scheme 1 for the reaction, right? This particular is the pattern for your scheme 1, right? Okay, the concentration profile at different species are provided. So this is the concentration profile for this particular scheme, right? So we have to tell based on this particular graph, we have to tell the correct conditions regarding the rate constant is or are, right? So we have to tell on the basis of this particular graph that which of the following options are correct, right? So what should be our approach in your MSQ kind of a questions, right? So always approach the MSQ kind of a question through options, right? It's less time taken and you will end up in solving your question in less time, right? So always approach the questions from option itself, right? Rather than solving the whole question, approach the options from options, right? So how what should be my approach to solve this particular question? So what I'll do, I'll observe the graph carefully, right? And these two graphs, right, you can see, just follow my cursor, right? These two graphs, this graph, right, that is the graph for Q, and the graph for S is basically following the same pattern. They are similar kind of graphs, right? The similar pattern of the graph, right, the pattern of the graph is same. So I can easily distinguish, I can easily analyze these two graphs, right? So I'll do this thing first, right? I'll analyze this Q graph and I'll analyze this S graph, right? So what I would observe that the concentration of your Q is obviously higher than the concentration of your S. So obviously the rate constant which corresponds for Q, for formation of Q, would be higher than the rate constant that corresponds to your formation of S. So basically your for Q formation, K2 is responsible, right? And if you're for S formation, your K1 is responsible. So obviously your K2 would be greater than K1, and it's present in the option itself, right? So K2 is greater than K1. So option C is our correct option, right? So we can easily tick our option C, right? Now if K2 is greater than K1, so how would K1 be equal to your K2? Obviously this is not possible, right? So we can eliminate this option number D, right? And now we are left with option number B and C, because option number C is correct and option number D is incorrect, right? So now we can analyze the option individually, right? So let's look out for the option A, right? So K2 is greater than K4. So here, which two, K2 is K4 is, right? K2 and K4 is analyzing. So we have to find out the graphs for K2 and K4, and right. So the graph for K2 is, right. So K2 is here present, right. So the K2 corresponds to the formation of Q, right. So we are talking about this particular graph, okay. And for K4, it's basically your formation of P, right. So we are talking about this graph, right. So we are talking about this graph which is for Q, and we are talking about this graph which is for P, right. Now we have to tell the relation among them, right. Now as you can see, at any particular time, right, this is, let's suppose at any particular time the concentration of your P, right, is less than the concentration of your Q, right. As you can see it clearly, right, the concentration of P is less than the concentration of Q, right. So obviously your K2 is greater than K4. So option number A would also be a correct option, right. So this is how you can solve this question, right. Now let's solve B option, right. So the option B is relating your K3 and K1, right. Now K3 is responsible for the production of P, right? That is your graph P, right. This is your graph P, right. And K1 is responsible for S, right. S. Okay, so this relation is relating your P and S, and obviously in this graph you can clearly see that your concentration of P is greater than your concentration of your S. So obviously K3 would be your greater than K1, right. So option number A would be correct, option B and option C. So all three options are correct, right, except D. So this is how you can solve this type of questions very easily, right. Just you have to analyze the figure and try to solve the question in correct way, right. So this is how you can solve this particular question, right. So let's move to our next question. So this is also a question which was asked from your chemical kinetics in your 2020 exam. So let's try and solve this question, right. Let's try and understand how we can approach this type of questions, right. Okay, so let's begin with this question, right. So the question is, a bacterial colony grows via cell division where each mother bacterium independently produces two daughter cells in 20 minutes, right. So the question is saying there's a bacterial colony, right, which grows via cell division, right. Okay, so bacterial colony is multiplicating, right. So generally, but is a trend of your bacteria, it multiplicates, right. So the question is saying a bacterial colony grows via cell division. Okay, cell division, through cell division they multiplicate, right, where each mother bacterium independently produces two daughter cells in 20 minutes. So the question is saying from each bacteria, right, from each individual bacteria two more bacteria are produced, right, in 20 minutes. So the this particular question is following, right. So from each bacteria two more bacteria are produced in 20 minutes, right. So what the next half of the question is saying, If the concentration of bacteria is 10 raised by 4 centimeter inverse cube, the colony becomes harmful, right? So if the concentration of bacteria reaches to your 10 raised by 4, then the colony becomes your harmful, right? Starting from a colony with an initial concentration of 5 centimeter inverse cube, the time taken in minutes for the colony to become harmful is, right? So if the initial concentration of your bacteria or the colony, let's take the initial concentration of the colonies as 5 centimeter inverse cube, right? So in what time period, right? In what time period the colony becomes harmful. So we have to analyze in what time period for the colony to become harmful. We have to find out the time period for the colony to become harmful, right? So how we can solve this particular question, right? So basically one thing should be clear in your mind, right, that the bacterial growth follows first order kinetics. Always bacterial growth processes follows your first order kinetics. Like now let's try and observe this particular equation, right? B giving 2b at time 20 minutes, right? And all of you know that this is the equation which is for your first order, right? K is equals to 2.303 by t log n naught by a. So this is the equation, right, which follows a first order kinetics. Now let's take the initial concentration of your uh, bacteria. Initial concentration of your one individual bacteria is 1, right? So initial concentration of bacteria is 1. So each individual bacteria gives your two new daughter nuclei or two new bacteria, right? So if one bacteria is giving your two bacteria, so the initial concentration of bacteria would be 1, and the final concentration or the left concentration of bacteria would be twice the initial concentration, right? Because each bacteria multiplicates by a factor of 2, right? So if initial is 1, so the final bacteria concentration would be twice the initial concentration, right? So we can take the here so we can take the value of your a naught as 1, and we can take the value of your a as 2, right? So if we substitute the value of your a naught and in this particular value, and the time is also given, right? So if we solve this particular equation, right, so we would end up in getting the value of a k as minus 0.0346 minute inverse, right? So this is the value of rate constant for first order reactions using this particular individual general equation for the process of your bacterial growth, right? So for the from the process of your bacterial growth, we found out the value of your rate constant, right? So this is how you can find out the rate constant value. Now the next part of the question is saying, right, if the initial concentration of the colony, yeah, we took the initial concentration of colony as 5 centimeter inverse cube, right? So if the concentration of colony becomes 10 raised power 4, the bacterial colony becomes harmful. So we have to find out the time for that particular process, right? Okay, so if the initial concentration of a bacterial colony is your 5 centimeter inverse Q, right? So this is the initial concentration of the bacterial colony, right? And the final concentration, right? It is not A naught, right? I'm very sorry for my mistake. It is A, right? So please correct this thing. It is A, right? So the final concentration of the bacterial colony we assume as 10 raised power 4, because we have to find out the time for this particular conversion, right? So initial concentration of the bacterial colony would be your 5 centimeter inverse cube, and the final concentration of a bacterial colony would be 10 raised power 4 centimeter inverse cube, right? So you have substituted these values here, right? And we have calculated the value of your rate constant as this particular value, right? So if we substitute the value of this rate constant, so we can find out the time, right? We can find out the time for this particular conversion, right? So this is how you can and the time would come out to be somewhere around your 219 minutes or 220 minutes, right? So this is the answer for this particular question, that 220 minutes would be required to become to make the colony harmful, right? So this is how you can solve this particular equation, right? So these were the three questions which was asked from your IT Jam Chemistry examination from Chemical Kinetics chapter, right, in 2020 year. So that's all for this video, right? So yeah, stay tuned for the